Hello everyone, I'm Aaron, a birding naturalist. Welcome back to another video. I'm here on the American River. Let's go see if we can find some Chinook salmon. Have a chat. So Chinook salmon are a pretty amazing species. The ones you see behind me, I'm sure you'll see some as we talk, coming up this little outflow and trying to make their way upstream. There's one. So these are fall run Chinook salmon. What is a run of Chinook salmon? What does that mean? I'll get to that in a moment. Before that though, I want to talk about sort of some salmon biology. So salmon spawn in gravel beds like the one that I'm sitting on. You can see this sort of gravel stuff. And they lay their eggs there. The babies hatch. They actually stay in the gravel for a little while when they're tiny. Once they get a little bit bigger though, use up the resources in their egg that they were hatched with, they start making their way downriver. That is when floodplains become incredibly important. In the main stem of most rivers, there isn't a ton of habitat. There isn't a ton of food. There's a lot of strong currents. It's not a great place to grow up if you're a baby salmon. And so floodplains offer an opportunity to find areas where the water is a little slower. There's one coming up right there. But floodplains are amazing. The water's a little slower. There's a lot more food. And there's also a lot more shelter, a lot more sort of habitat complexity. So as I was saying, floodplains are incredibly important habitat, and it's a habitat type that is being increased along most of the rivers in California here and there in parts, habitat restoration project sections here and there, which is fantastic. Once the baby salmon live on those floodplains for a while, get some size on them, they then make their way out all the way into saltwater. Their whole body transitions from a freshwater biology to saltwater. And they'll then live out in the ocean for occasionally only 1 year, sometimes as long as 8 years, but most of them stay about 3 or 4 years. Out in the ocean, growing, eating, and then when they're big enough and healthy enough and strong enough and ready to reproduce, they reverse the process. They transition from saltwater back to freshwater as they move across, in this case, the San Francisco Bay and across the Delta. And they go up the various rivers of the Delta throughout many of the rivers of California and then find a place to spawn and lay their eggs, and the entire process starts. The adults, in this species, in Chinook, the adults die. So the adults spawn, they leave their eggs for to create the next generation, and then they die. Some salmon actually can spawn many times. They'll come up a river, spawn, and then the adults will return back to the ocean to do it again. That is not the case with Chinook. Chinook, the adults all die, which kind of makes this last stage in their life kind of amazingly epic. I mean, they're giving it all, they're leaving it all on the field, pushing with everything they've got up these rivers. They don't really eat very much. They don't have much in their minds, in their sort of biology at all, except to find a mate, find a place to spawn. That's it. As long as they have just barely enough resources to get them to the spawning grounds and to find a mate, they're done. Kind of a beautiful, tragic poetry to it, in my opinion. But as they come up the rivers, all salmon don't come up the rivers at the same time. And that's where we get to the idea of runs. different runs of salmon come up at different times of year. And so this means that they're kind of meeting up with other members of the same run when they get to the spawning grounds. And so they're kind of genetically isolated from each other, at least a bit. So that's where they kind of come to almost like a subspecies status, where they're sort of reproductively isolated from one another. Not completely. They're still definitely genetically close enough to be the same species, but there is some distinction. And so that's where the California Delta gets really interesting, because we have 4 distinct runs of Chinook salmon that come up. These fall run Chinook salmon migrate up anywhere from like September to December, up the rivers, many rivers of the Delta of Central California. And they spawn kind of right now, October to December. And that's really one of the things that differentiates the different runs, is when they migrate and when they spawn. Another run of Chinook salmon are the late fall run. So there's the fall run and the late fall run. Late fall runs migrate up many of the rivers of the Delta in Central California from October to December, so a bit later. And then they spawn from January to April. A third run is the Sacramento River winter run Chinook salmon. These are salmon that migrate from November to August, and so across the winter, and they spawn kind of April to August. And due in part because of the basically one river that they migrate up, the Sacramento River, and due to the limitations on that river, due to dams that have been built on the Sacramento and the Sacramento tributaries, there is not a lot of habitat available to these, and their population has declined to the point where they're actually listed as federally and state endangered species. So definitely a species that is getting a fair bit of attention, and they need it because they're not doing so well. And the fourth and final run is the Central Valley spring run Chinook salmon. These migrate from March to September, and they spawn from August to October. And right now, like where they are right now, is they migrate up the Sacramento River and also the Feather River. Again, limited by dams, this run used to be, historically, the most numerous run of the 4 of them, the Central Valley spring run Chinook salmon. But now they're dramatically reduced, habitat loss, dams, access to miles of potential spawning habitat in rivers, which has meant that now this is a species that is both state and federally listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Acts of those 2 governments. So again, a species that is getting a fair bit of attention from restoration groups, from agencies trying to create more habitat for them, trying to make their lives better. Because again, they need it, and again, not doing so well. They're doing a little bit better than the winter run, but still, there's very limited places where they can spawn, and so their population has declined accordingly. Where I am here on the American River, I'm actually just below the Nimbus Fish Hatchery. It's just sort of up around a river bend or 2 upstream of me. And so that is one of the efforts that humans are doing to help increase the numbers of salmon. Since there's only so much square footage of river available, there's only so many square feet of space for them to create their nests, which are called redds, and lay their eggs in the gravel. And there are more salmon than there is space. So one thing that happens is some salmon travel all the way up and actually jump up this fish ladder into, which is like a broad staircase of pools that the salmon can move from one to the other, slowly increasing elevation until they get into the hatchery itself, at which point sperm and eggs are actually harvested from these salmon. Remember, they're going to die. So the end result is the same for these fish. The adults die, but their eggs and sperm are harvested and actually artificially fertilized in this facility. And the eggs are then cared for, the babies are then reared, and the young ones, once they get a little bit bigger, are released into the river, back as if they had been eggs actually hatched there. So it's a way of kind of boosting the population up, since they don't have hundreds of miles of river to actually just spawn in naturally. So it's a really interesting effort that humans do, and it's been a really great boost to keeping a lot of these populations going. So I hope you've enjoyed some views of salmon behind me, and I hope that you've learned a bit about Chinook salmon and these incredible, just like super athlete fish that come up our rivers of Central California to follow through with their life cycle every year. Incredible animals, and it's been wonderful to come and see them. Like I said, hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you learned a thing or two. As always, thank you very much for the view. If you like this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. And until next time, enjoy the natural world.